Hi, everybody. Today I talk about startups and just life as an entrepreneur with Henry Kirk. Henry has the unique experience of working at large companies, working at his own startups, and making a jump between them a few times. Today he's the co-founder of Studio.init, which he started with a bunch of his colleagues from his time at Google. So over the next hour, we're going to have a pretty wide-ranging conversation on a bunch of topics, mostly focused around just what it is to be a startup founder. What does your day-to-day life look like? How do you wear multiple hats and remain focused? How do you hire people effectively, especially when candidates today are probably just an AI assistant away from having the perfect answer, which might mask how talented they truly are? How do you deal effectively with multiple co-founders, and a bunch of other topics that we'll be just naturally getting to along the way. It's gonna be a fun one. So let's get started. Okay. Well, Henry, it's great to chat with you. I've been following your content on LinkedIn for quite some time, and so it's just great to get a chance to talk to you in real time about all the things you've been doing and dive deeper into all the other topics that we might touch upon during our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely, Krupa. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah. So, I like to ask this question of all my guests, which is, you've been working in tech for a long time. What made you decide to start working in tech?
What made me decide to work in tech? That is a great question. I think I've always been into technology since I was a kid. I was fortunate enough, my dad had a little chain of retail stores, and so I was exposed to my first computer there. It was like an 8088 or something like that. It was like a five and a quarter floppy. He had a reel-to-reel there at one point, and so he had a full-time database administrator programmer there. So when I would hang out there on weekends, I would kind of like look over his shoulder, and he introduced me to like GW Basic at the time, and so I just got books at the library and kind of got hooked. So that was pretty much the start. I just was introduced to it and I thought it was super cool. Oddly enough, I was not a gamer. A lot of people were like became like very into gaming early on when they were into computers. I was more interested in like how they worked, and I really liked making software. That was it was always fun. I had way too much fun messing around with like little programs at the at a young age. So it was pretty fun.
What was the first program you remember creating?
Yeah, well, I knew you were going to ask something like that. So I was kind of like a bored kid trying to channel my energy in computers. And so what I used to love doing I'd write these like scripts that and I would go to like the computer stores and I would install the scripts on the computers that would say like bad command or file name, or like mess with this, like have fake UI on the screen. That would put them in there, and then you would have like some sales associate run over and they were all beeping and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. It was fun. It's like old, like this is like before Windows was even out. It was just and I used to like doing that. So that was pretty much just like annoying people was one of the first programs that I that I used to write. Yeah.
Was there a particular programming language you were really drawn to?
So I started in Basic, and I stuck with that. It was what I just kind of was introduced to, so I would mess around with that. And then let's see. And then basically like then essentially the internet was out. So I started dabbling in, HTML and other things like that. Well, it's not a programming language, but like I started to move more towards like web-based stuff. And so I was doing um um Basic at the time, and then I started a little bit of Perl, and I was doing some PHP stuff. But what I was really interested in was kind of like some Java and JavaScript really early on. I remember getting like the books and going through that. So I didn't really have a preference, but I was just like super interested in learning everything. I remember one of the bigger applications I wrote years and years ago was like server-side JavaScript, which is like essentially it exists today. It's like I guess Node and what it was, and I thought it was cool. It was like a Netscape thing, and I remember as like a how old was I then? So it's probably like 1995 maybe. I remember applying to become like a certified, like Netscape enterprise developer. It was pretty fun. It was just like cool. I loved everything about it, and I used to keep like notebooks with like ideas for programs and like sketch out things. It was a lot of fun. Much different than kids growing up today when they're introduced to computers. So yeah, I tell my kids like it's like I'm torn. I'll go and say something like, "Oh, that was like the good old days of things," but there's plenty of really cool things that they're exposed to today that I didn't have, to be able to kind of like accelerate their learning or like dive into something really cool. So
Yeah, it's hard to know if it's actually a good or a bad thing because the struggle of having to like know resources in like no like websites that you could just go or YouTube
that's
back then
right.
that can go and be like, how do I do something? You kind of had to figure out stuff on your own. There's probably like Byte magazine was a thing. I think Wired back then had like some interesting things, and Barnes and Noble was a thing. You could go to the
Yeah,
computer section and
yeah,
find like like esoteric books on topics, and you had to figure it out on your own. But
yeah.
beyond
There
that, it was
was.
like
Yeah.
that you learned so much through the mistakes you made than you didn't, which I feel like today's students may not be getting the same level of depth in some of these areas.
That's true. You had to go really deep. There was no Stack Overflow to save you, so it was
Mm.
just getting different books. The hard part was is that things changed so much that the books were behind, or you would like have to really stay on top of it. Where these days, I mean, obviously books are out of date today, but there was, like you said, there was no YouTube, there was no internet, there was no like courses to get or anything like that. So you were really on your own. I feel like the creativity is still there, like from back then to now. When you talk to people, it's just like their mechanism for kind of like how they kind of dive in. Like I used to, um, I think, yeah, I I think I'm as of like the last year, I'm just as excited now about where computing is going as I was as a kid, and the things that you can do with the like LLMs and some other technologies that are out there. It's just like really allows you to accelerate development because I'm the type of like I call myself like a product engineer. I like to build things and try to you know solve problems with that. I don't necessarily care what the code looks like. I'm sure people beat me up for that, but I think the outcome is more important, and so how you get there is, um, I don't really care. So I'll try different things as long as I can have the outcome and do that. So the last year has been pretty exciting. Um,
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think every generation of developers probably goes through this phase where they're like, the stuff I learned back then may not be relevant anymore, but there are more interesting things to work on because I know, like you said, you started off with like, basic, for me, it was actually JavaScript and ActionScript, the early versions for the Flash world. Now, someone, let's say we were having this conversation, let's say 20 years ago, 25 years ago, someone who learned like assembly and machine code might be like, oh, why couldn't these people like learn machine code? That's where the real magic is at. And
yeah,
because they didn't learn it, they're missing out on some of these things. And right now, with all like the rise of like AI assistants, where you have an idea and you get code that kind of comes out of it, you don't think anymore about what version of JavaScript am I using, or is my node running the server? Probably all those little details you probably as tribal knowledge you've been collecting over the years no longer needed, and you're just like focusing on that idea. And so I'm always curious to figure out like 20 years from now what will be that generation's version where they look back at LLMs and go like, wow, that's such a backward way of building applications. Or
mm,
will apps, as they even think about, will they even exist in that form? When we think about that, what the future looks like.
yeah. You're right. It's right. It's be like, oh, what version are you using? I remember I've been an iPhone developer for since the beginning, and I remember, the conversation would be like, oh, what version of iPhone OS or iOS are you using or something like that. And now it's just like even if it was me, I've been for the beginning. I can't even remember. I used to be able to know all of the different APIs and the features across the different versions and what the capabilities were across all the phones. Way too challenging now. It's just too broad and too deep, and it's like it doesn't really matter either anymore. It used to be very important back then, but yeah, so yeah, that's completely gone. It's now just, oh, I'm looking to build this. And like, okay, cool. It's no longer
Yeah.
like, oh, you really got to consider, X, Y, Z because of this, and here's a workaround for that. It's just things have accelerated so much.
Yeah, and maybe it's just my bias speaking here, but I also felt like things were just easier back then. Also, like there was something nice about having a text file. You write some HTML in it, use an FTP client, send it off to like use type your username and password, and just like send it over to like a server you pay like $4 or $5 a month for, and everything just worked immediately. Whereas I think most people today would probably be like, "What is an FTP server?" Like
Yeah,
where's
it's
where does
true.
AWS fit in? And you're like, AWS doesn't have to fit into this. You can actually deploy websites without needing any of these complexities there. And so sometimes I feel like the abstractions are a good thing. It helps you focus on more bigger problems. Like if you're an FTP server, you got a million people visiting it. Yeah, there's a very good chance that your site is going to fall over unless you have a CDN, which back then was like maybe Akamai was like the one, but it was for big clients. If you were individual, you didn't really have access to any of that. And so you're like, there are new problems that have been created that are great to solve in the future, but things in the past didn't have the same things, but pros and cons of it. But I do always wonder, would the world have been better had we kept like some of those little details still in some introductory material, so people are like not completely missing out on what it took to get to where you are today.
That's a good point. Yeah, everyone's impatient these days. One of the things, clients we work with are we we work with startups, and so we have to get stuff done fast. I mean, I can appreciate what you're saying, where it's like years ago, many years ago, we were valued. If we said it took 2 weeks, it took 2 weeks. If you say, I think I'll be done in 2 weeks, they're like, can you get it done in a week and a half? Because there's some guy that said that it, could go faster this way or something like that. So yeah, the whole industry has changed, and it's challenging to compete because there is an endless amount of ways to do what we do. We're no longer like very special.
Agreed. I mean, it's always this tension between quality versus quantity, and you see this across so many other industries. I think they often see like this as I feel like software development was like somewhere in the middle of it, but you see the early signs of it in other industries. Like I think with graphic design, you saw that when like Fiverr and some of these services came up, where you put like you say like I want a logo, I'm going to pay you $5. Someone in a part of the world where $5 is actually a larger amount of money than what it is in America, they created something, and you're like, I don't know enough to be like, is it a great quality logo or a good quality logo? But it's good enough for me, and I'm going to start using it. And we saw the floor on the pricing for like a lot of these graphic design agencies and companies start dropping rapidly. It's like, okay,
Mhm.
the services I used to provide that were like, I used to think about the craft, the art of how do I make a pitch, how do I do all these things. Now it's like, you just have one email conversation, 10, 20 minutes later, you get like options very, very quickly. And that audience now is now struggling with AI, is able to generate visuals and things very, very quickly as well. We saw this with content creation in general, with like text editing, news articles, and things like that, where people used to spend a lot of time like actually writing detailed pieces. Now it's really a quantity thing. Like how many articles can you write in a given day, knowing that one of them might go viral, the other 90 might not. But unless you write all of them, you won't know which one's going to work, because your competitors are doing exactly that much using machine learning or using like crowdsourced technologies and so on. And so you're like, there's a lot of it is changing. I think software development is starting to hit that phase as well, where the art of the craft and things that you got to pride yourself on like back then is still valuable, but maybe not as much for a certain set of clients who want something to solve their immediate problem as quickly as possible, whether it is done by a human being or by some computer or something like that. They're okay with it, and then the price for those things can vary widely, and the cheaper things are, oftentimes people will gravitate towards
Yeah,
those.
it's true. And it sounds like, you've been around as long as I have. And way back when the computers were much slower, obviously, they're, not as efficient as today. So poor programming practices would really like come out and stare at you. These days, the machines are so fast they can mask a lot of the inefficiencies. So you don't have to really write performant code anymore. It'll be much harder to notice. So I think that's like been a big change, and just like you're right on the point of just you know where do we kind of fit in, and I think it's the uh, providing like the guidance and the experience, that folks not coming into the industry today don't necessarily have. It's like, how do you make the right decisions? How do you make the conversation I come up with a lot of like working with startups? It's like, um, I want to be able to scale to 2 million users. Well, how many do you have today? We don't have any. Okay, so let's build out the first 1,000 user infrastructure, because I guarantee you're going to pivot along the way. So if we spend all the time on building for the million users, you're going to waste money and you're going to learn and you're going to change it anyway. So, I see startups that will do the million route because that's what they think is the right thing to do. And then I'll see the startups that build the fragile stuff because someone made some poor decisions along the way, and then they have to like go back and fix it. I'm of the opinion that like you need to balance it. So if your system goes down because you're flooded with users, probably a good thing. You'll figure
Yeah.
it out, you get it back up. But the key is knowing how to make the right decisions along the way to build the products, to get it out there, because at the end of the day, you're building for users. And if users don't have the product to work with, then there is no business there and you don't have anything. So it's like speed is very important. And so I think like that's where kind of like engineering has kind of gotten to today. It's that how fast and it's speed is important for being competitive too. These days is like there are developers all around the world and they can build things very quickly nowadays. So it's like if you have an idea, I see this a lot too. It's like I talked to so many startup founders. It's like there's a lot of patterns that I see. That was one of them. The second one that I think is very interesting is that they always say like I have like such a $1 billion idea, and they'll tell me this. I'm like, I'm sorry, but you're the fifth person to tell me this in the last month. So it's like, I was like, well, one way that you can win is to get it out there faster than someone else. And number two, it could be make it a better experience or market it better. So there's a lot of different ways you can compete, but it's like knowing how to do that and what knobs to turn along the way. So I feel like that all kind of like makes it very exciting these days to kind of
Oh,
work on
absolutely. I mean,
software.
it's like the first step is like, will people even care that you're building it? And how quickly can you validate that there's interest or desire or need for what you're doing? And once you have that, then you get to the problem that you're mentioning. Like, it'd be a good problem to have if there's like a million people using your website and so on. But taking a lot of time to build for this utopian future that you may not even get to because people don't find any interest in it. And the other one also is that you have an idea today. By the time you get your MVP out, let's say 6 months from now, is that idea still even valid or is it even worth it? Because
That's
the
right.
speed at which some of these things are moving in is one where, if I were to make a bet on like when can we get really high quality video by just using text prompts, I would have been off by like years. My guess was like, when I saw the first version, I think like of Will Smith eating spaghetti, I'm like, okay, this is awful. We're not going to get real time video that's really good things for at least, 4 or 5 years. 6 months later,
Yeah.
there's like, a much better version of it. And then another 6 months later, you're seeing like, this is like, you're seeing like videos and actually like, professional commercial like advertisements being recorded entirely generated through AI. And you're like, okay, that was something. If I was like working on the perfect solution to get the perfect processing pipeline for my video and all these things, I would be lost at this point because I'm like, nope, I'm not. I'm already out of the game.
Yeah. I don't even, I can't even like, to me, it's gone so fast. It's like a blink of an eye. I mean, I remember when I first saw that Will Smith, and it's funny, kind of funny that Will Smith is the benchmark because you're not the first person to bring that up. It's like it is really crazy how fast things have come. It's like and you know what? Actually, you know what I think is kind of interesting that I haven't seen yet is no one's really gotten like that the whole like AI detection thing done very well, and so not that like it's there are no startups that I've come across that is anyone is working on anything to try to like protect it because the next big wave that we're going to have is um uh I think of like all of this fake stuff that's coming out there, and it's not necessarily for like the propagandists and like the government conspiracy theories. I think that these engagement seekers on social media are going to use these things to like help prop up their reach and exposure.
Yeah,
And so I'm going to see this now with the the DeepSeek stuff that just came out. And there's folks jumping on it saying, and it's going to replace this and that, and showing screenshots and videos of stuff of all of it working, and some of it is factual and some is not, and they're doing it to because people are looking it up and trying to get engagement of it. So I have it'd be really cool to see like startups that are trying to look to like build stuff to at least say, oh, hey, this is generated by AI. It could be code, it could be a video, it could be an image or anything, just to be able to like validate that it's not real. Um, yeah, just like like tying that a little bit together. One of the challenges that I have, you know, in like hiring for our teams is so many engineers are reliant upon LLMs to do a lot of their work that I've seen uh, cheating when we ask them not to use LLMs and other things that makes it very hard to gauge their ability to do the work without that crutch. And so, like that, the detection software that we use when they're doing their like coding exams catches some of it, and other times we have to watch the video to go see the copy and paste and how fast they do stuff because I know how long it should take a person doing it. So like that's where like I'm going with this is like nobody has built anything that's really good to just kind of say like, oh hey, this is created by an LLM or something like that, because I think that is like important to be able to at least like mark it, watermark or something like that to be able to say that, but could be wrong.
Yeah, it's almost like, there's this hive mind that controls everybody at this point because whatever you might be doing as like individual thinking or creative thought, you're like, I'm just going to outsource that to an LLM. And so all you're doing is basically just this warm body that translates what the LLM tells you to put, and then you put it onto your screen. If it's like an interview or like an essay or something like that, you're not really in any more like exercising those muscles again to kind of come up with these things on your
Yeah, that's
own.
right.
But that's
Yeah.
an interesting one though. So for these interviews, then how do you actually have them record the screen at the same time so that way you can see what they're seeing at the as well, or how does it work? Because I never actually thought about I'm a product manager, so most of my interviews are conversations like what you and I are having right now, and so I don't do any coding interviews. But how does it work? Yeah, because
It's
I can totally see
we've
like
tried a
pasting the
yeah.
ChatGPT.
We've tried a bunch of different things. We've used a bunch of without giving away like how all the
Yeah,
secrets. So folks that might be listening, like how do I know that they're cheating? So there's a piece of software that we use for interviews, and it has a lot of like triggers in there where it just flags it for us to review it. It doesn't go and say it's definitive one way or another. We ask folks to do it themselves. It's very, very important. Why? Because I know that LLMs don't write great code, right? And even if you're the best prompter in the world, you still have to know what's happening because it confuses itself. They lack context these days. The context windows are not very large on some of these tools, and so you need to be able to know what's going on. So we want people to demonstrate that they have the core skills. So how do we do that? So it records their screen. It's an IDE in the browser, and it records the whole session, and then it flags things along the way, and we just watch it. So a lot of folks don't realize it, and it says that hey, we're recording your screen. Don't do this, don't do that, and we get it. You can see by how fast they do it. So if they do a coding challenge in 5 minutes, I know there is something wrong. You see a lot of copy and paste. We see during live interviews, so we'll see people that did really well on the pre-screening section where they're asked to like code something, get into a one-on-one, like on a video chat with someone, and they can't actually perform well. So we know that obviously something was there. But I want to say that at of the we've interviewed probably um, I want to say like 1,500 people over the last 2 years for our engineering roles that we had open. And I want to say that more than 50% of them have cheated by not following the guidelines that they gave for us in assessing folks. And so we've tried to make it challenging. We've tried to make it interesting to kind of like pull people out and like find the real creative talent in there and then bring them onto our team. But it's been very hard. So, I we're about to hire another round now, and I think that we're going to have to revisit kind of like how we're doing it as well, because we do have to enable these like AI tools in a way. And I think that they're in a state now where it's okay that they use them. We've always said that it's okay to use them, but I think that like you need to understand how they work to be able to be effective with them.
yeah,
And I think that like they will be the future. And so we have to find people that have like the core skills that still can use it, but also at the same time understand how to use the LLMs and don't completely rely on them. It's like a partnership. It's kind of hard to explain, but it's like we're trying to figure out how to balance that, and that's
yeah.
something that we're trying to come up with.
Yeah, and Dylan touches upon the common question on all over, which is like, are interviews in tech broken in general? We've always had this conversation for forever, but now with like coding questions that can easily be answered by an LLM, have you do you where do you stand on that? Like, do you still think that asking coding questions is effective way of gauging someone's abilities, or are there other things you think would be a better indicator of someone's
Well,
ability or
yeah,
skills?
there's all of these like YouTube videos on like how to crack the interviews and things like that. And so you can usually tell when they're super prepared for that. And I want someone that is going to be able to solve problems and be creative with it. I don't care if they solve the lead coding problem in, 30 minutes or 20 minutes. What I want to do is I want to see how they solve the problem. So it's like it's how they think that's more important. So yeah, we do the traditional interview. And I was at Google for 8 years and Amazon for two prior to that. So I have 10 years of these, styles of interviews to try to find really smart people. At the end of the day, it's like, how do you think? And uh, and then also like for the type of work we do is like what kind of drive you have and like how ambitious are you at the end of the day. And like there are certain things that can be taught and certain things that are just kind of like
Yeah.
how people are, raised or they just have it in them or not. And we're trying to find those sorts of things. So yes, I give the coding challenges and I'll pay close attention to how they do it. We have multiple steps in our interviews for whether it be design or engineering or product or anything like that. And after the initial like coding screening to just see that like where they think, we'll then bring them in like a virtual or an on-site interview, and then we'll just ask them questions to probe how they think. That's all it is. It's like there could be no answer, but we just want to see how they approach it and if they break down along the way. So
Do you see the tendency to like be unable to answer these questions properly without using an LLM to be more of something that a lot of junior developers who are just like coming into the industry recently doing, or do you see this also with experienced developers who've been doing this for a very long time, yet they've lost the ability to write code effectively, essentially, or they've just been working in different roles than what they actually were supposed to be working on, which happens in big tech all the time. You'll be supposed to be working on something else, but a reorg happens, you're working on something completely different, and now you're interviewing for something that was probably supposed to be experienced in, but you're not. Do you see any patterns in that? Because I
mm.
guess I'll put it differently. At least whenever I often like work with various like subcontract various parts of my website and hobby things to other people, and I tend to go for like the most experienced people. I'm like, I've known them for like 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, because I know exactly that they know these skills inside and out. Whereas I'm always like a little bit wary of like like spinning the dice and going with like someone who's more new, because I just cannot know like, is it work truly theirs, or do they use all these newer things to create things that definitely get past my filter, which is by far not the most tuned.
There's a lot to it. I think, first off, the job market is horrible for engineering right now. And so I think to be successful, you have to apply for dozens of jobs, which makes people cut corners to try to get ahead. So I think that's part of it. You are not only is your resume made or tweaked by an LLM, you are now trying to get through the many coding challenges or pre-work that's needed to be done before that. So how else do you get through dozens of them,
Yeah.
to be successful? It's too competitive right now, across the board. Um, when I used to do a lot of interviews, that you bring up like folks that were kind of like out of their game and coming back into it. I'd see a lot of folks that were engineering managers switch back to be ICs and they would struggle the most. But at the end of the day, it's preparation. So it's like
Yeah.
if you go into these interviews really well prepared, you will do super well. If you are not, then that would be a problem. Like I used to do a lot of coaching for folks going into interviews while I was at like Google and Amazon, and it's like I'd always tell them, "This is your one shot. Be super prepared. Here are the things to practice with. Practice in the environment that you're in. Code on a whiteboard. Code on a piece of paper because you got to get used to like spacing and writing and being clear and thinking through it." And so it's like those are all of the things that kind of made you successful if you had those core skills. That's where people would usually break down. They just kind of like jump in unprepared. These days, I think if the market wasn't so competitive, you would you probably wouldn't see so many people leaning on the LLMs to get through these interviews. That's like one area that I feel pretty strongly with it. It's just the circumstances. But at the same time, there's been such a push for people to enter in engineering to get these big salaries that there are people that probably. pick the career when that's maybe I don't know if they like really love it and they're just trying to stay in it. So I can see those folks kind of like getting lost and struggling to find the right fit. And so we'll then probably cut corners potentially to kind of like find those roles. You know, like when Google used to only hire generalists for a bunch of years, and then they started changing it. And basically, the definition of a generalist was I can put you in front of anything and you'll figure it out. And you're code agnostic, like you don't have a preference, you don't have a certain stack, you're willing to learn anything. And I think that's really important, especially today. So you have a lot of folks that are very fixed on like one type of tech stack or another, and there's good and bad about that. So I happen to think that like you need to have a very broad set of skills, and that also will make you make better decisions. Like you talk about like folks that are newer and less experienced, is like until you've done the whole end-to-end thing and felt the pain of all the different nuances, like you may not realize what it is to like build the products and like how to make the right decisions. And then there's also a lot of solo folks out there, and so I think that and I was solo for a part in my career too. And until you really have to work in a team with other engineers to like bounce ideas off of people and have to challenge like and basically defend your decisions and why you are choosing things, like you don't have that outlet to improve yourself, right? And so then you become dependent upon other things. So I think there's all these like different circumstances that kind of like make folks drawn to this, and it could be temporary, it could be permanent. I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, it'll be interesting to see how it all evolves. It's also goes back to the question on, will there be an AI system that can actively detect accurately that someone is, it is genuine content or not genuine, or someone's actual ideas or not, and that could all feed into it. But as we've seen historically, though, no matter how good the technology gets for detecting, bad actors, the bad actors also evolve to figure out ways of essentially bypassing those detection logic as well. Now, we can talk about this endlessly. Like, this is like a fascinating topic on its own, but I want to get to the present a bit.
Sure.
Studio.init. Like, tell me more about your startup and how you got there and all the things you're working on.
Sure. We've been around for just about 2 years. We were born out of the Google layoffs in January of 2023. My entire org pretty much was cut, and when the layoffs happened, I was a manager at the time, and I noticed that it was going to be really hard for me as a manager to get a job. So a lot of us wanted to kind of like continue to work together. I'm kind of like shortcutting and compressing it down, but like over a couple week period, I decided that I didn't want to go back to the corporate world for a variety of reasons. And so a bunch of us wanted to keep working together. Couldn't think of a good startup idea. So I said, like, hey, we were kind of like a startup team within Google. Why don't we try it and see if we could do this outside of Google? Inside of Google, we would kind of like do 0 to 1 projects. We would do our own like research and build stuff. And so I said, hey, we're really good at this space. So let me do a post on LinkedIn. I think I had like 1,600 connections at the time. Like maybe someone can like connect us with something. So I wrote a post kind of announcing what we were doing and seeing if I can get a couple meetings, and it went ridiculously viral. And so that kind of gave us we were fortunate to have like a little like propping up and get ourselves going, got some projects out of that. And that gave us kind of we had a goal of getting it done by the time our kind of like severance kicked in. And so, and also like not everyone's family was kind of on board with us playing business. So we had like a cutoff. And so then, we proved that it was a viable concept at least. And so did that and continued to grow it. And so what do? We do like product, design, engineering, and go to market for all in the 0 to 1 space. So we work with early stage startups, and we kind of help them kind of take their like grandiose vision and turn it into something very concrete that would be valuable to users. And we try to back that up with research and get that out the door for them so they can kind of either find product market fit or raise additional funds or whatever they need to do, whatever their goals are. So we've worked on with a lot of I actually just looked this up the other day. We worked on 34 projects in the last 2 years, which is kind of cool. And so we're still hanging in there. Had some ups and we've had a lot of ups and downs along the way. A couple clients didn't pay us, and a couple startups didn't make it. Some of them did pretty well, and but at the end of the day, we like the process. We like the people that we work with, and I do not want to go back to the corporate world. So every day I wake up, I make sure that I have the mentality that my back is against the wall so I can keep going. So,
In your history, you've jumped between entrepreneurship and the corporate world a few times.
yes.
And so, what makes you, feel like this is it? You're not going to make that switch back into the corporate world
Well,
again.
the reason I jumped into the corporate world is because all of the startups, except one, maybe two, that I had prior to that, I was always very entrepreneurial, like failed. And I couldn't figure out why. And so I was like, these big companies probably know a thing or two about, scaling and growing businesses. So I was like, I should go join one of them. So I had an opportunity to join Amazon. And I said, all right, done, took it. And that was like history. And I really enjoyed working at Google. I probably would have stayed there. I was always planning on leaving to do something of like what I'm doing now. So it's just a little early. The, but I filled in the gaps. I learned all the things that it was a lot of it was me and my leadership style, how I kind of like worked with teams. It was my decision making. I learned how to make better decisions. I learned how to work better with people. Also, my technical skills grew over the years. I understood more about you know like what is user growth and what did
Yeah.
how do you nudge users to use the product? How do you do research? I learned everything that like I was just trying to figure it out back then. And so why do I think I'm not going back to corporate world? Because I feel like I filled in enough of the gaps that I can figure out the rest today. And this is what I wanted to be doing from the beginning. So
No, I think that's great. When you talked about earlier about how you want to validate an idea and then slowly grow it into something bigger and see how it goes. With many startups and many products, you often have time. You often are like, okay, I'm going to figure out what the problem is. I'm going to experiment, try things out, and so on. In this case, you had a very accelerated time window. It's like you were like, okay, we need to get a startup that's going to basically prove itself viable, within this narrow period of time. So in some ways, the process came first, and then was kind of like, okay, now what do we focus on? How do you navigate that? Because it did seem like from what you're describing your history, you were passionate about certain things and certain, ideas and things you want to pursue. Whereas this might have been a little bit different. It's like, okay, we need to get a startup. Now the clients might dictate what we end up focusing on.
yeah, yeah, that does happen at times, but so we're a little bit different. So first off, I love the process. I love building things, and I love figuring out the idea and executing on things. Like that is what is great. And so while I was, at Google, I was having a blast because every 6 months or so we were doing different things. And so I felt that I was able to be creative. And so in this business, I'm able to be creative and things don't, we're not spending years on the same product to get bored. And so the types of startups that we work with we don't just kind of like take a list we don't take a list of things and then say, okay, we're going to build this for you. We really partner with you. So if you said, if you were like, hey Henry, I want to build this thing, here's the PRD. I'm going to like, do you really need this? I'm going to tear apart your PRD. I'm going to like challenge your assumptions, all the stuff that you either appreciate or you don't. And we're going to try to help you get to a better place. It could be that your PRD is really well thought of and researched, and I'm just challenging because I like doing that. Or it's maybe you'll find things that you didn't think of, and then we'll get to a better spot. I like that part of things. And so when we're working with startups of whether it's a good fit, we're doing that early dance. Those that don't appreciate that how our style for like how we like the partner, they tend to like go elsewhere. If they're looking to like completely just dictate end to end. So folks that kind of like appreciate that partnership will tend to work with. And so it's not always like my way or the highway. It's like a collaboration. It's like I said before, it's like some of the startups that we have, like they'll be like, yeah, we need to handle 1 million users. And I'm like, okay, cool. Well, show me your growth plan of how you're going to get to 1 million users. It's like, well, in 5 years. Okay. 5 years, a lot of things can change. So maybe we should just start with this. So yeah, so we've been very fortunate. We've worked with really great people, and we haven't had any of those issues, personality differences between the startups that we work with where anything's gone sour.
Do you have any kind of preferences for types of projects you like to personally work on?
It has to be challenging. We don't want to just do websites. So we gravitate towards ridiculously hard problems. And I don't know whether that's good or bad. One of the most challenging projects we had in the recent time was so there was a ex Amazon Robotics founder started this. I call it like robotics coffee drive up through company. It's called pingthrough.com. They're super great founders. And I had met them through LinkedIn or something like that. And we had a conversation, we were just meeting. I think it was, anyway, so we had a conversation and he was saying, oh, yeah, we're going to build this system. And what their premise is that, you get super hot coffee from the robot. Like when you drive up, it like makes it on site instead of where in like Starbucks, it's going to have like it's sitting on the counter when you order ahead. So he was explaining kind of like their initial approach to building the software to power the system. And I said, I don't think it's going to work. I think this is a harder problem than you realize. I was like, I have some experience with that. I'd love to work with you on it. And then we went back and forth. And so we were into building it. And we ended up building this presence detection system. So you order the coffee at your house, you're driving up there. And at some point, we detect that you're nearby through one of the algorithms we wrote. And then the robot, well, it's now powered by humans now, but eventually it'll be robots, will start preparing your coffee, and then it knows when you drive up, it knows the order of the people in the line, you don't see the people; they're just hidden inside. And so at the system says put so and so's coffee in the window, push the button, and then the window opens up and it goes and it's just magically your order is there. And then it's like I've seen the videos of the customers' reactions when they drive up and all of a sudden their order is there and they had no idea. Like it's completely magical. And so that has been one of the more challenging things. Like we had issues with, a couple times I think they ran over one of the beacons that we had set up to try to detect like the presence like so we had to learn how to harden that a little bit. That was fun. We went through multiple iterations of the software trying to get it to work because different cars would have like different signals and like different thicknesses of like the glass. I'm not like an expert in that space, my partner is. But we had built this incredible system that I don't think anyone really has done. And it was truly magical. And that was, so we gravitate towards these like hard problems. That was a lot of fun.
No, that's very cool because whenever I always feel like, at least in my mind, whenever you cross from the software realm into the real world with physical things,
Mhm.
whole different ball game, whole different things. And my lack of experience in that area often means I miss obvious things that I would catch with software. I'm like, oh yeah, like for example, you mentioned like someone ran over the beacon. I would have like probably not thought about that on day one. I was like, oh yeah, someone could run over the beacon, or
Yeah.
weather could be really bad, or like a bunch of different things could be playing a role here. So how much did you learn and end up discovering during the building of the early versions of it, where you're like,
Everything. Yeah.
yeah,
Everything. Every day it was like something different. The list of like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. It's uh it was a it was completely endless, and we finally got it to a really good spot. And now they've raised another round of money because I think they have a really great idea, and so they're going to go far. And so they're coming back, and we're going to try to like improve it and make it even better. But it's just like it was. I knew it was a hard problem going in, but I had no idea how hard it would be because there was no books on how to do this. There's no like, oh, you just want to do because it's like you can't just do geolocation because it's not accurate enough. All the phones are different, and the thing that kind of got me the most was the um, the different types of cars and how they're built will will read signals much differently. And I didn't really truly understand that. I went in this very naively, because when we had did similar kind of like signal processing early in my career at Google, there was no one, there was just people walking around when we were trying to do stuff and some of the prototypes we were building. So I was like, oh, okay, this really does make a difference. So how do you solve for that? It's like it got it was very challenging. Um, but hopefully I'm answering your question. I think I'm rambling at
No,
this
no,
point.
you are because I work both at Google as well as like on my side projects. I work with like agencies and like doing these things. I'm always like fascinated with like how they're able to bring in the talent and solve some of these really hard problems. So in your case, do you have like people on your direct team that are like experts at like navigating hardware and software, or do you have your own setup, your own consultant clients and so on that you often work in partnership with
No,
who are not
yeah.
part of your company?
No, we don't actually contract out anything. It's all done local. We don't offshore, we don't nearshore any of the work. It's all us. So if we can't do it, we'll pass on the project, or if if we have an opportunity to grow off of it, we will. I was very fortunate that one of my partners did his PhD in kind of like Internet of Things, which included signal processing and things like that. So we were able to have some very nerdy conversations early on of like how to design the overall system that even challenged some of the hardware manufacturers assumptions when we were working with them, which is pretty funny. So we were lucky there, but it was also something that I knew we can solve because I had prototyped a bunch of similar things. Like I was very interested in that. Like magical experience is what I've always kind of loved to work on. So whether it's delighting someone through like an app that does something cool, or an outcome of having some sort of like bridging the hardware to the software, I've always loved doing that sort of stuff. So this was perfect. So even if I wasn't familiar with it, I would have figured it out. Went to the good old whatever, the Barnes and Noble of these days, the library or something, and gotten books on it if I had to.
Yeah, yeah. I think like Amazon had their own bookstores for a bit, but I think I've seen a lot of them not be there anymore in the mall. So yeah, I don't know
Yeah.
where people go nowadays.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess
Physical.
I would have had to go to a library or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. I haven't been to a library in years as well in terms of it. Yeah, but when you started off, you had in general. Okay, let me take it back up a bit. Starting a company is hard. Starting a company with a single co-founder is hard. It's when you started, you had a lot of co-founders. How were you able to navigate? Who does what? Where's the when is the tie-breaking decision needs to be made? How did all that navigate? How did that work out?
Yeah. First off, having partners is hard. It's like getting married to more than one person. So you all have to get along. I was fortunate that I'd worked with all these folks for many, many years, so we kind of knew everyone's quirks. Except the thing that changed over time was everyone's tolerance for handling the craziness of a startup, the ups and downs, the will we make payroll next month or have earn some money, or will we finish this project on time? Will we do this? Will we get our next project? So that is what really caused most of the kind of bumps along the way, and we also had some challenging clients. Like I said, a couple of them didn't pay us, and one in particular was rather large. And so we worked for months and months and months, and they never paid us. So, we had fronted a lot of it. We put our severances to kind of seed the business, and that evaporated pretty quickly. So, so it was just challenging. So how do I navigate the partners is, you need to set the expectations ahead of time and agree who does what. Everyone had their skill set since we built a team together. So we already knew what everyone was good at. And so we just kind of did our thing, and no one ever stepped on someone else's toes. But at the end of the day, it was just the life of a startup that kind of, you know, um, uh, had some of the partners kind of decide to move on and go do something else. I'm still crazy, and so I'm still doing it. Where I don't think we're still a startup, and we're not, we're on our way. We're not completely there. But I've been I don't know. I'm the type of guy, like once I go into it, like I'm not going to stop. I'm going to figure it out. I'm very stubborn in that way. So I'm still hanging in there. But like my advice is to anyone else is like know who you're building a partnership with. You may think you know people, but trust me, once money gets involved, things change very, very quickly. So,
Yeah, and I think like everyone, like various people's tolerance for risk and just navigating the unknown is often very difficult as well. Because I think you mentioned you worked with a lot of them at Google itself, which is a large company, and there are a lot of
mhm,
processes in place where what you might think is considered chaos within a large company is actually not considered chaos at all in a startup where there is no box basically where you have the boundary where like the worst thing that could happen is A, B, and C. In a startup, there is no container. You know, things can go in any direction. You know, extremely high or extremely low, and there's no seatbelts. You know, in many
that's right.
ways, and you often find that individuals who may think of themselves as very risk tolerant are not risk tolerant at all because what their basis of measuring tolerance does not apply in startup world.
That's true. Yeah. It's you have the ability to tolerate risk is really what makes or breaks your ability to hang in there. Now, you can join a startup early on when some of those kind of like things are figured out and be very successful. And there are plenty of people that I know that purposely look for startups that are at that stage. But the very early on, it's not for everyone. It's like it's super stressful. But for some reason, I don't know. I like that. Call me
Yeah,
crazy.
I mean, they always say like certain personalities tend to thrive in these kind of environments. You know, the conviction of your belief that there is going to be a destination I will get to. I think that is a big motivator for many people to be able to do well in
Yeah.
startups, and knowing that yes, there might be chaos and hardships along the way, but I'm still laser focused on the destination. And I think that's where I think being a founder of that mindset, which you clearly seem to have, plays a big role in keeping things still moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, you learn a lot. When I had one of the reasons that I feel like I was able to start my career at Amazon was because I had all the startup experience during the interview. It's like a lot of the folks that I were working with, I had started on the iOS team there, and they didn't encounter the things that I had, and so I thought that made me unique there. So maybe that helped me get the job. It's because I had been through all because I was responsible for so much on my own and having to like start up and fail. So if you can hang on long enough, there are plenty of like opportunities to learn, and then you embrace those learnings. Like I make mistakes all the time, but I look forward to those mistakes as long as they're not super bad. So I like, oh, okay, cool, and then I'm not going to do that again, and that's going to make me that much better in the future. So it's, I don't know, I love the chase, I love the ride.
Yeah, and with startups as well, you mentioned like you kind of look at like what are the areas of expertise that each person will focus on, but it's also very fluid as well because you have to wear many hats. You might be doing marketing one day, you might be doing like core development one day, you might be like negotiating, you know, payroll or like business deals and so on. And those skills are ones that are hugely invaluable. So like you mentioned, your startup experience helped you join Amazon and do some of these things. Is that I always find that too many people try to conform when they go to large companies. Like, how can I do exactly what everyone else is doing
Mm.
so I fit in? But I always find the more successful ones are the ones who have this like variety of experiences, but they can be like, you know what? Why are we doing it that way? It doesn't make any sense. Let's actually do it differently. And you're saying that not because you're just trying to be difficult. It's your diversity of experiences you've had doing these kind of startups and things like that, which, for someone with your experience at that time would have put you far ahead of someone who's probably been inside the corporate environment at Amazon, for example, for many years and never had the opportunity to think differently about how things are done. So it's almost an advantage
Oh
to be
yeah,
able to have that.
absolutely. I mean, I think it's like the real world experience. It's, you're really in a bubble in these companies. You mentioned that before. And so I think having a broad set of experience, is important. Like, a lot of folks will ask me, hey, give me some career advice, and I'll usually say like try to join a startup or something like that for the first couple of years because you'll learn more. Then enter big tech or something like that. If you go into certain big tech companies too early, you end up with these like bad behaviors that don't mesh well in the real world. Or you learn things that are completely not applicable. Like there were certainly systems at Google that I worked on that so, I mean, how many companies in the world can have to deal with 1 billion users? So it's like it's not valuable to you outside of it. So if you spend your early career there, it's not really going to help you. It may help you understand like how to scale things, but it's not useful. So I'll usually say, hey, go have fun on your own, go do something like that for a few years, then go kind of like I did, fix your mistakes by going to bigger companies to try to learn how to like round yourself out and fill in the gaps.
Yeah, that is so true. Now, speaking of career advice, you also have a podcast, the Leadership Lab podcast. I watched a few episodes just to
Oh,
like,
cool. Thanks.
get a real feel for like, are you AI generated? Are you real? Like it's hard to tell,
Mhm.
like for all we know, like now I could not be a real person. Also, I could just be an AI avatar that has like pre-recorded audio samples that's creating all this.
That
But
is a good
so how,
idea.
yeah, so how do you balance your time between it? Because, you mentioned at the very beginning that, having a good idea is a part of it. How you market it is a big part of it as well.
Mhm.
And I think you're very effective at that marketing piece because like all your posts that are compelling. I scroll through a lot of LinkedIn posts on a typical day, but when I see yours, I'm like, I'm actually going to read this because this actually seems very interesting. So you got the hook properly figured out, and then of course you bounce it out with like your podcast where you also go into more detail on some of these things. And I'm like, there's a marketing capability that you're having that I think sets you apart.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate it. Well, I consider myself a little extroverted. Like, I'm not your typical introverted engineer. And so I like talking to people and being out there. And I recognize that when, look, when I made this first post on LinkedIn, I did a little bit of reading to try to figure out like how to write a post on LinkedIn that, could be useful. But I'm not a social media guy. I never went viral, nothing like that. But when I did go viral, I then kind of figured out what I did right. Um, and I knew that I had to keep up the kind of writing and communicating. And I've always been a very direct person, so I'd rather kind of tell it how it is. I didn't want to come across or even go down the route of like these fake gurus everywhere, where it's like you have one hit wonder and then you're selling a course for $49 to teach people how to kind of get to where they are. It's like I've had successes and failures, and there are things that like I can tell you about the failures that would blow your mind, right? And I try to be honest about them and explain, what creating a startup or just a business is really about. And so I think it's resonated with folks. So I just, my style is just to be legitimate and try to like share things that I think are important and be real and not like I have no agenda. Like I don't at the end of the post say, hey, if you like this, go subscribe to my newsletter. Or please follow me or anything. It's just like I share, and if people choose to follow me or read what I have, great. I started a podcast because I think one of the most valuable things that I did throughout my career when I was a leader was have a coach. And so I wanted to kind of like show folks that what coaching was all about. So I joined up with my partner, with my coach, Jonathan Aronson, to do the podcast. We haven't done it in a while because I've been a little busy, but like he actually was, ironically, for this year, wanted to start it up again because it turns out that like we've had some evergreen content over the last year. So where we were like posting episodes and no one was watching them. All of a sudden, we have like, hundreds of more subscribers and other things. So we're gonna try it again. But like, why did I do it in the beginning? Is like, again, it's just was part of the whole overall. Is I just wanted to share things, and there were a lot of people that reached out when I had kind of announced our what we were doing, and they saw it as I was my goal was to flip the layoff into something positive. Everybody on there was like, "Oh, I'm laid off. It's the end of the world. I'll never recover." And I was just like, "Okay, I'm going to turn this into a good thing where I'm going to look back in a couple of years and say, thanks," which pretty much I did a couple of weeks ago. And so that was the benefit. And so a lot of people reached out saying like, "How do you do it? How do you stay motivated? How do you find the time?" So a lot of this was just an extension of that, which was like, okay, here's some secrets I have and talk about things that are helpful to people. So yeah, that's why. I mean, I never thought I would like earn money or anything off of it or like, oh, this is part of the marketing plan. It was just, let me try this and see how it goes.
It's also just a great way to just kind of not lose touch with like what coaching and often goes into as well, because you're so focused on your startup life and you work actively on solving these problems for your clients that, at least for me, the reason I do some of these podcasts is that it still keeps me like, I get to meet really interesting people, but I also learned so much through the process as well. And like, when I did research to talk more about you on the team, like, wow, there's all these really cool things I just never really thought about. Like, for example, you have an app that you have like the schedulator app
Oh yeah.
in the app store. So you're like, I'm like, okay, how do you balance the time? It's like you're doing all the startup work, you have all this client work, and you're also doing all this like public facing content for LinkedIn, which, I know that to us it takes like maybe 30 seconds to read it. It probably took you a lot longer to probably create it because you
Hours.
have to.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, right. So it takes a lot of time. So like oftentimes it's like the typical iceberg principle. Like what we see is only a small fraction amount of effort that it took for you in order to create all these things. So how do you find the time for all of this?
I work
How do you
constantly.
context switch?
I work constantly. Um, I'm very fortunate that my family is very understanding and understands the mission that I'm on to kind of like reinvent myself after being laid off and get back to like where we were. And so, yeah, 7 days a week. 7 days a week, I wake up, I get up before 5 o'clock every day, and I either hit the gym or I start working, and I work till 9, 10 o'clock at night, and I crash, wake up again, I do it. It's one, some of the things that I try to get across is that it is there is no 4 hour work week in what we do.
Yeah,
And so I preach that a lot. It's because I think that sometimes folks make it seem like I don't want to make a presence that it's not that I don't have sleepless nights and it's not super hard. It is incredibly hard what we do and the amount of effort that it takes to do this. Especially you're wearing multiple hats. So yeah, I'm doing the sales and marketing. I'm doing the post to try to like support that. We're doing, apps like the Schedulator, which is part of our venture studio, which is part of our long-term vision of like having our own startups and things that we want to cultivate and build and not have to rely so much on client work and stuff like that. So to do all of that and to still service clients, it takes a lot of effort. So I'm basically working two full-time jobs.
and you have the time to chat with people like me on this.
Yeah.
So Henry, thank you so much. That was
Yeah, you're welcome, Kruva.
quite the journey on this, and yeah, wish you best of luck, and hopefully we'll keep following
Thanks.
along and have this conversation in the future again.
No, I appreciate it. It's awesome. Thank you for having me. Hopefully some folks find it valuable.